endless skies. Oh, I'm living that nomad life, city to city, feeling alive. From mountain tops to ocean drives, unchained, I thrive, I thrive.
Thank you so much for joining us on Nomads 50 Plus. My name is Chris Kalaboukis. I'm coming at you live from Athens, Greece. And today we have a very special guest. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us about how you got into the Nomads 50 Plus life and what your passion is?
Wow. Okay. Where to start?
I know, right?
I have basically, I've been a digital entrepreneur for the last 25 years. I used to be an
Wow.
attorney, graduated from law school in 94, practiced for about 5 years. And I was like, no, this is not what I want to do. Later,
But what is it about the
kind of
legal
found
life
out
that you
that,
didn't like? What is it
what?
about the legal life that you didn't like?
Well, that's an interesting point because I don't really enjoy the practice of law too much, but I was very good at it.
Mm,
And I feel like if I had to, I could have carved out an existence there. But years later, I reflected upon it and I'm like, I just didn't like working for other people. And when you work in a
mm.
big law firm, you've got big egos who are basically lording over you. And I learned a lot from those guys, but they weren't the most pleasant people.
It really is like those shows where they show these law firms and all the partners are, the way they are. All of that stuff is pretty realistic.
You get a wide range of personalities, but the name partners where I'd end up, like I said, I was good at my job. I ended up getting put with one of the main guys, the head partners, and those guys are tough. So,
I
and it
believe
was
it.
okay. It was very good for me, but I only say that because I got to leave and do my own thing and succeed on my own terms. Anyway, I started a digital business back in 1998 involving email newsletters, which are all the
Wow.
rage right now. Interesting. Email never dies. That one didn't work out. It's the only business of about 12 or 13 that failed. But it was my first one, and I didn't know what I was doing. I was a liberal arts major with a law degree.
If
Anyway,
any
I
business is going
basically
to fail,
figured
your
out the
first one should probably be the right one to fail. It would be
yes,
your
I
first
bet
one.
much better than the last one, right? So, but what I did figure out is the early art of online marketing, and that content is what worked. If you could build an audience, you could build a business. So first, I built my own little law practice just to pay the bills, honestly, while I was propping up the failed business before I finally let it go. Then I was like, okay, so you've learned how to market, and I saw an opportunity in real estate. This was right at the beginning of the MLS coming online and where you could display it on your site. And I'm like, here's a product for me to sell other people's listings. So I would be the buyer agent. Anyway, I built that into my first entrepreneurial business. I had this goal. I'm like, I just want to make $365,000 a year. That's $1,000 a day,
Nice
right?
round number.
Yeah. And I got there, and then I learned that whatever you set your mind to, you'll get there, but you may also limit yourself by
Mm,
creating, this arbitrary number. The long and short of it is I really didn't enjoy real estate all that much either, but I did succeed in it because that was important for me at that point to succeed outside of the practice of law. And once I did that, then that's when I really kind of opened things up. So in 2006, I started a site called Copyblogger, basically a one-person blog that explained how I use content to attract prospects and build businesses. 2 years later, that would become known as content marketing. So I was teaching it before it had a name, and now it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. So
nice.
it was an interesting time. And so that one person blog grew into a 65 person company that made $12 million dollars a year for several years in a row. When I passed the mark of 50, oddly enough, I had a very marked shift in what I wanted to do and what I valued and what was important to me. So I ended up rejecting an offer of capital. I bootstrapped all of this. There was
Hmm.
never any investors involved. So I had on my desk private equity offer didn't sign it, proceeded to talk to some people in the industry, got about 3 people interested, and then sold the company the next year.
Nice.
So that was a long way to get to the point that when we did that, I took my family on a trip around the world. Interestingly enough, because I'd been location independent with my business the entire time, the trip was planned before I sold the business. We were going to do it, and I was just going to keep working.
Right.
And then that happened, and I got freed up a little. I still ended up working. That's just my nature. But
In your blood, right?
well, I was really
once
trying
you
to figure
started
out,
doing it. It's
yeah,
hard to
what's the
slip
next
away.
thing? You know, you're not going to
Yeah.
retire, right?
Yeah.
So it was on that trip that I read a book called The Longevity Economy by Joseph Coughlin. Talked about how people over the age of 50, there's many more of us. The population is aging due to longer, healthier lives and lower birth rates. And I was like, this is fascinating. I mean, these are my people. This is me.
Nice.
And I had already been doing an email newsletter on the side just for fun called Further. And that was about my own kind of exploration of personal growth. Then it became focused on midlife. And then I finally saw what my audience was really asking for was, what are we going to do about the fact that we don't have enough money to retire? But we need to keep working longer, but employers are trying to get rid of us. So
Right.
that's kind of my focus now. But back to the trip, that's when my wife and I decided this is what we want to do. We want to travel. We're not going to go back to Boulder and buy a bigger house and buy more expensive cars and all that crap. I had lived it pretty large during the go-go years there. And I'd done that, and it's not necessarily fulfilling. I'm not saying it wasn't fun, but it's not going to fill that, purpose within you. And I guess I grew up a little bit when I turned 50. Isn't that what it's for?
Right.
You find, what do you want to do when you grow up? You figure that out at
You
50.
finally realized you'd grown up when you hit 50. It took that long.
Exactly. So yeah, that's kind of where we are. We just sold our house, and we're about to take off on this trip. Now, this was a decision made before the current political situation that's making a lot of people want to leave. I can't say that that's inconvenient in the timing, but our intention was always very positive, like a life
Right.
of adventure. I wanted to still keep working from wherever I was, maybe not as hard as I used to work, but still, I like it. I like what I do. So
Right.
I hope that didn't
Okay.
take too long, but that's
No,
how we
no,
got
that
to
was
where we
fine.
are right now.
So you were when it comes to sort of like funding your voyages, you have already had a bunch of successful businesses, like 12, you said. So the funding basically came from those businesses. So you don't really need to work in your travels, but you can because you kind of want to. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean when we sold the company, people are like, "So you're going to retire?" And I'm like, "No. I mean, I would just get myself in trouble if I were to retire." But it really comes back to, this is who I am and this is what I like to do. It's interesting because I certainly don't want to compare myself to Don Draper, but the ending of Mad Men, I don't know if you ever saw it, but
Hmm.
it's clear that Don lives for the idea, for the work, right?
Yeah.
Like he can't not do it. And it's not about the ambition or the status or anything like that. And I think that's a kindred thing. Like if I have a good idea, I'm going to go do it. I just want to.
Yeah.
But I am more mindful now because I did let my ambition kind of get the better of me. I never intended to, build a 8-figure software company, but each step by step, each opportunity made itself clear. And I did not say no, or I did
Hmm.
not ask, do you really want to do this? And ultimately, I'm very proud of what we built. But I would never do the same process again without a very careful examination of what does this mean that you're going to grow or hire someone and become responsible for more families like you were before, right? You really have to ask those questions, especially I think at this stage of life.
Right. Interesting. So would you say that this, like being able to have a location independent business from early on made it easier for you to want to do the traveling, or did you always want to do the traveling?
Well, I did, I increasingly since 2006 is when I became location independent. But oddly enough, we still lived in Dallas, Texas, which I did not enjoy for about 6 more years because my wife's family was there. We had small
Right.
children. Their grandmother was there. My wife's sister was there. You know how it goes. You need family for support and all of
Sure.
that. So moving to Boulder from there was really the first move. Like, we can live anywhere we want. We spend every summer in Colorado anyway. Let's just move to Colorado. But during that time, and again, this is something that my kids got the benefit of that my wife and I didn't when we were young, which is they traveled from, you know, babies, to Europe. I mean, they've been all over the world. And then on that trip, they literally went around the world for a 7-month period. So they did get that kind of exposure. So travel has always been important to us, but it wasn't until that trip, 2018, 2019, where I went to turn to my wife and I'm like, we could live this way all the time.
Hmm.
People do this all the time now.
Yeah, yeah,
And,
that's right.
and we are uniquely capable of doing it because I can work from anywhere. So that's been the plan, but now it's happening. And literally all morning, we've been making logistical plans because we got to get out of the house in a few weeks, and we're literally homeless. I'm like, okay, where are we going to go? The only complication we have right now is our Roddy is 11 and a half years old. Roddy's lived to 10 usually. No one
Hmm.
told her. So we have to factor in, that we still have the part of our family to take care of. So we're working through that, but it's very exciting. There's a lot to think about, but it's still exciting.
Very, very cool. So you kind of didn't think about the location independent piece of your business at that point. It just happened to be that this is what you were interested in doing. It just happened to be location independent at the time. So
Well, if you
you
do,
weren't focused.
I wanted a business without clients that was not geographic specific. So I guess it was intentional, but that wasn't the primary feature. I
Right.
think I always wanted that. Right before I met my wife, right around the time that I ended up leaving the law firm, I was already thinking about running away to Costa Rica. There's
Right.
something in me to do it. So that was there, and I suppose it was always in the back of my mind. But it was really determined by the fact that I didn't want clients, and I wanted the basis of the business to be based on writing. I wanted to do more writing than I was doing in the real estate business. So that was the main criteria, and it wasn't to make a ton of money. I was just like, let me do what I want and make enough money to support my family, and I'm good. And then as soon
Right.
as I did that, I made more money than I'd ever expected to make. And I
Wow.
think that's important. I think there's an important lesson there when you allow yourself to just say, this is what I'm doing. I'm good at it. I can do it. I don't care about the consequences necessarily, as long as my family's okay. And they did more than okay.
So would you say Copy Blogger was your most successful business of all of them, or
Well,
what it turned
yeah.
into?
So, at first, and the 12 number, you have to take into account how things worked. So I started the site Copy Blogger. I launched a startup off of it in 2007. It got to 7 figures in revenue by the end of the first year. In 2008, I launched a WordPress startup off of Copy Blogger that got to $3 million within a couple of years. And then we launched our first SaaS product as a third startup, right?
Hmm.
So each of these things were individual companies with other partners, as the technical partner mainly, because I was the marketing and content guy and I had
Right.
the audience. So 2010 comes around and I have these partners and these businesses, and they don't talk to each other because there's no upside for collaboration. So I actually left one business, substituted in another person who wanted to join with us, and we formed Copy Blogger Media. And that was the company that became the 8 figure company. So
Okay.
several 7 figure companies, three, and then the 8 figure company. Then I've had three since then and three before. Somewhere the math works out to around 12. But
Okay.
yeah, by far the amalgamation of my work with Copyblogger, once it came to be one company, that's the one that hired 65 people. That's the one that made it to 8 figures. And ultimately, that was the one that was sold off in a few transactions.
Very cool. And you said you didn't. You said the businesses were had no clients, but I'm assuming that's not 100% true. You kind of like you did have customers.
We had
And how did you
customers,
build
not
that customer
clients.
base?
So
Yeah,
when I say clients, I mean client services, where you're
right.
doing service work
Like an
as like a
agency sort of
freelancer
thing.
or a consultant or something like that. We wanted to sell products, right? And we sold software as a service, but you understand that's still a product.
Oh yeah, of course.
So
Well, that's the tough
yes, it
part,
was.
like
We
moving
were
from the service space to the product space, because the
exactly
service
from selling
space
my
means you've
time
got
to
to
selling digital
exactly,
products. Yeah.
exactly. So I mean, everybody should be moving towards that sort of model, because if you don't move to that model, then you're constantly stuck selling your time for
Yeah, but on the other hand,
money.
almost everyone I know who moved into products or became a digital entrepreneur started off serving clients. They were a
Right.
freelance designer, they were a coder, they were a writer, right?
Yeah.
So there's no shame in starting there, and you're doing a valuable thing because that really, I mean, there's this big debate where people are like, well, freelancers and consultants aren't entrepreneurs. And I guess the entrepreneurs love saying that because it makes them feel special. And I'll agree it's a different thing. But taking the step and becoming economically self sufficient, I don't care how you do that, you have made a major step away from how most people are, right?
Exactly
So
right.
I celebrate people who are in the client services stage, but I also encourage them. Hey, it's cool over here too. You should let me show you how you productize and you do all this kind of stuff so
Yeah.
you can make the choice whether you want to continue to serve clients.
But that's when you get your true freedom, because you can disconnect yourself from actually having to be there at all times. When you
Yes.
create products, it's kind of like making money in your sleep, that whole concept. And that's
Right.
basically what you do when you create these products that sell themselves when you're not around, or where you're in Belize or wherever you happen to be, then that's sort of like the ultimate step to go to. But you're right. I mean, people usually start in the service space, and then they migrate, they create some type of product which can then live on its own. And it's not
Yeah, my
something
primary
that's new.
motivation was, again, I wanted to write, and that lends itself more towards a product in my mind. It doesn't have to. But the main thing is, I'm an introvert. I'm not shy, but I am introverted. And serving clients, I was so wiped out at the end of the day, interacting constantly. I was just like, I don't want to do this. It's harder on an introvert, I think, to work with people at that level and be really successful because you have to be on in a way that's very draining, while an extrovert might love that model,
Exactly.
interacting with people constantly. But even then, sometimes clients can be a pain in the ass. So you get enough
Sometimes.
of, that strain and stress, and you're just like, how about we do something different? And usually when people move, into the next model, they're motivated by, okay, I succeeded. I'm good at this. I like some of my clients, but I'd rather pick and choose. And if someone bothers me, I don't want to do business with them. And when you do that by having other streams of income, you've got leverage, and leverage feels really good.
Exactly. Exactly. So you said you're just about to start on your travels. Has there anywhere you've been that's been especially amazing to be in, or are you still just starting out?
Yeah, it's interesting that right after we got back from our trip, the pandemic happened, and that was a big shock. For us, it reinforced that we don't want to be in the United States the next time that happens.
Hmm.
People were kind of awful. um, so then, I speak every year at a conference in Cabo San Lucas.
Hmm.
So as soon as travel was allowed, I was going to Cabo every year, and that conference coincided with my birthday. So I would hang out for an extra week and celebrate my birthday.
Nice.
And I got to know Baja Sur really well that way, like Todos Santos and Cerritos Beach and all these areas, outside of Cabo that are really amazing, that have really grown a lot since the pandemic because that's where people escape to
Right.
when things went into lockdown, right? So that became an option. Costa Rica, I've been several times in the last couple of years. Panama, I've been to Bhutan, I've been to Peru, so I've done a lot of travel in the last 4 years, which is kind of the ordinary course of my life, but we still lived here in Boulder. So I've seen a lot and we've got a lot of choices, but then it becomes Where do you want to settle down on more or less a permanent basis? We do not know that yet, but we are excited to discover that place by
Nice.
spending time moving around, right?
So you are planning to find a place to settle down and not just just be sort of nomading around the
Well,
world
I guess
continuously,
it's always an option to just keep moving. I don't
right?
know. Well, one day will I kind of tire of that? I don't think I will. My wife might, and she's a boss. So,
Tell me
you know,
about it.
you can never say never, but the idea of spending the year in three countries that you get to explore, what is that? 4 months at 4 months at a time, right?
Yeah.
I think 3 months is the perfect amount of time to really start to understand a place, and then you can decide if you want to come back. Like we lived in Grenoble, France for 3 months, and I can't wait to go live there again for some period
Mm,
of time, just because I know it well enough to where it will feel like I'm returning to a place, and then you explore it at the next level, something like that. Did the same thing in Australia. We spent 3 months in Australia. More American than I expected.
really?
Australia is really America with no guns and a cool accent, right? It's very Americanized. And I
That sounds
didn't
very
like that it
compelling to
was so
me, actually.
Americanized, but the accent is awesome and the lack of guns was very comforting.
It sounds very compelling.
Yeah,
I
I
like that
mean,
description.
and a lot of people are looking for that. The top places when people say they want to leave, they're looking at Canada, UK, Australia, and these countries don't necessarily need immigration as much as the countries that kind of compete for people like us, right? Like
Yep.
Costa Rica, like Mexico, like Panama,
Yep.
Uruguay is now coming up on the radar as the next Portugal, which Portugal
Yes.
is the former Portugal, right? So you see these hot spots, and they're that way because they want you to come. And I don't
Exactly.
think some people understand that some countries compete for us
Mm,
to come. They don't see it as an intrusion. Now, what happened in Portugal is it worked too well, and then it drove up real estate prices, and then people started to resent it. So the Portuguese government did the right thing. They pulled back on their golden visa program to slow it down. So I think you'll see more and more of that, especially again with everything that's going on. People are thinking more in a migratory mindset than perhaps ever before. And with the technology and the business models, we can do it. More people can do it.
absolutely right. Have you put any thought into healthcare, health and wellness, and what you're going to do about that when you're overseas?
Oh yeah, healthcare is a big concern, and much better solutions than what we pay in health insurance and premiums here in the United States, given that I don't have a corporate job, so it's kind of pricey. I can go to Costa Rica and pay out of pocket for less than I pay for
Right.
insurance for most things. If something major happens, uh, there is you can opt into the Canje, which is the state insurance, health insurance, but there's also private insurance options in Costa Rica, Panama, Mexico. So we'll probably go with private insurance. But first of all, you do travel insurance to make sure you're covered. It's valid everywhere but the states,
Right.
and then you try to figure it out from there. So that's one argument in favor of finding a place to settle down when you get a little bit older or if you have health complications. But for now, we've been taking good care of ourselves, plan to live quite a long time. But the affordability of it is a blessing. A lot of
Yeah.
the doctors you'll come across in Mexico or Costa Rica were trained in the United States, and then they go back home and they charge pennies on the dollar
Exactly.
because that's the nature of it. So I feel really good about health insurance. What are your thoughts on that?
I think you're absolutely right. I think we in the States, we have a certain sort of picture in our minds of how expensive it is to get healthcare
Yeah,
here, right?
right.
But then when you leave, well, not here, but when you leave the country, you realize that everywhere else it's so much less expensive. And this is not just healthcare. It's actually a lot of things that we
Yeah.
have stuck in our brains because we're so ingrained into the American mindset. Is when you leave, you don't realize how different things are. And
Yeah.
it's not just healthcare. Like I've heard of people doing the same thing where they don't get insurance at all, or they just get insurance which sort of brings them back when there's something comedic or something like that. But you pay in the country because the healthcare systems are so much less expensive. So
Yeah.
I think that's a viable option.
It's so interesting, and you hear these stories over and over again from people who are travel or nomads or expats, that the culture shock they experience is not when they move, but when they come back to the States to visit and they realize
Exactly.
that the environment is insane, but we're
Hmm.
so acclimated to it that it's fast and it's expensive and it's violent and I mean, and people are just like, oh my gosh, I came back to the United States and I freaked out because couldn't drive on the freeway. Everyone's insane here.
Well,
I
people
understand
say
that.
people drive insane in Europe, and I don't find that at all. I mean, I enjoy
Yeah.
driving in Athens.
People
It's like
in
it's
Europe
fun.
and
It's like being in a rental
also
car.
Also in Latin America, everyone, it looks like they're driving crazy, but they're highly skilled. Like, and no
Exactly.
road rage, people honk all the time, but it's a tool, not,
Exactly.
no one's pissed off. But yeah, every time I leave the country and I land somewhere else, I just feel a weight lifted off of me. And I know it's the environment and it's the
Mm,
culture. And I hope to write about this at some point. I'm too close into it. Maybe I just need to be gone for a while, but the culture of the United States is sick. It's
mm.
broken. I mean, and I don't just want to be negative about everything, but it really is unhealthy. That's how I feel about it.
Right. Well, I mean, every obviously every country has its own pluses and minuses,
Of
but
course.
we are so when you've lived here for a long time, you just think this is normal, right? And when you go somewhere else, you realize that this is not necessarily normal. There's other types of normal that are actually better, especially when it comes to cost of things. That's the thing that's the biggest sort of thing that in my mind is that you go elsewhere and things are so much cheaper. And you
Yeah.
go, wait a minute, we're living in a very expensive place, and it doesn't have to be this way, right? You do not have to live in the most expensive place on the planet, right?
Yeah.
You can still have a great life in somewhere else. So,
And another thing is we're addicted to convenience. And then some people go somewhere else and they're upset because they don't have the same level of instant gratification. I'm like, wait a minute, think about why you need that, because you live in an insane asylum where if you don't get that level of convenience, you can't get anything done. You've got so much going on. Just slow
yeah,
down, take it
yeah,
easy. It's a hard adjustment. It'll be hard for me. I'm pretty, intense in my own way, but really it's just about work, and I do my work on my own without direction. So take me out of the rat race environment and everything should be much calmer. I think
so do you, when you go to what
it'll
is the
take me
thing
about a
that's
month, I think, to acclimate. So
nice? So if you when you go to places like you said you were talking about France and Costa Rica, when you stay there for 3 months or whatever, what do you find is the biggest difference between where you are now, with like the States and these other places?
just the pace.
Mm,
In France, especially, I love, there's all these American jokes about France. And I'm like, look at what you're saying. You're ridiculing them because they have an actual life, with
yeah,
actual culture, right? But, I mean, people in France, it's true. They live to go to lunch more than they live to go to work,
exactly.
right?
Like,
And what is
what do you
wrong with
do for a
that?
living? What do you do for a living is not the first question they ask.
No.
In the States, it's like, what do you do? What do you do? What do you do? It's like, why do you need to know that? I mean,
Yeah.
that's not the
And what
first
do you mean, what
question.
do I do? Is
Yeah,
all I do my work? But we know how to answer that question because we're part of the system.
exactly. It's not- That's why we need to get out of it, right? That's the way it
Yeah.
works.
Exit the system.
Nice. So, do you have any recommendations? So you've done this for a while. So do you have any recommendations on sort of like tools and technologies and things that will help make it easier for people? I'm assuming obviously everyone needs a really good internet connection, but do you have any other suggestions or anything like that?
Yeah. I'm not hugely dependent on exotic forms of tech. I mean, it's like Google
Mm,
Docs and websites. And I mean, since the pandemic, everyone understands the tools that are required for location independent work or remote work. They just don't necessarily get to do them. You know, they got called back
right.
to the office, or, you know, they're out of the office, but it's only hybrid. So you can't go anywhere because you've got to be
Right.
back in the office the next day or whatever.
Yeah.
So that was the terrible bait and switch. People really thought they were going to get to do their job from anywhere.
I
But
know.
I never believed that, because employers are about control more than they are about anything else. And when I ran my company, we were 65 people all over the world, fully distributed, no office. I didn't
That is
care when.
absolutely the way to do it. If I were to start a company today, in fact, if I were to start a company 10 years ago, that's exactly how I would have started
Yeah.
it, is
And we
just
were
like that. You
all
do not need an office.
The thing, I mean, we're all internet people, like online too much, and they all came from the copy blogger audience. So they were all into the mission. Like, you didn't
Right.
need a manifesto on the break room wall. They knew what the mission was and they were on board. And so it worked out really well. But I think it works for a lot of companies, but it's better to grow it that way, I think, than to try to adapt a Fortune 500 company,
Right.
which really is not that agile. But it
Now,
most definitely is a great model if you're open to it.
oh yeah, absolutely. So that was, you said 2006 when you first started that, or was it, or you said 98, but then what your first start was
2006 was when I
successful.
started Copy Blogger.
Okay.
2010 was when it turned into a employment-based company.
Right. So between then and now, so it's like almost like over 20 years, right? So what would you say has changed over the last 20 years? Like what makes it, if I were to try and start a company like you did in 2006, would you say that what you did in 2006 would still fly today, or what would you do differently if you were to start now?
Yeah, so it's interesting because, you know, the blogging world at that time was its own little ecosystem and it was amazing. And then you had early social media that didn't have the algorithmic throttles that they do now. You
Oh,
had you had search engines that were ripe for the picking for people who publish a lot of content. That's what was so revolutionary at the time. But
right.
people are doing the exact same thing right now on Substack. They just don't know the history of it. They don't know this started, you know, 20 years ago or so.
Yeah,
You know, so yes, it's still valid, and that's why I moved further to Substack, because it's a ecosystem centered around email, and email is still the best audience channel. You can make YouTube videos, you can blog, you can podcast, but ultimately, if you're wanting to sell something, you need to get people on an email list, because that is the still the transaction medium of the internet. So
absolutely.
yeah.
So would you say that, so it sounds like you can take the exact same concept and just put it in the right platform and it'll still apply. It just depends on which platform. Because back then you had WordPress or whatever blog software there was available, and now you look at Substack or some other service, and you can build your business on that service as well in the same way.
Well, I recommend a hybrid approach. I always recommend you still have your own site. So Further's on a WordPress
Sure.
site, and then it's on a subdomain for the Substack with their email component. But Substack part is important. But again, you don't ultimately run that company, so you always have to be careful that you're controlling your assets to the best you can. But you own your content on Substack. You can download your email list and take it somewhere else. That's the criteria about not getting hosed, if you will,
Right.
by some venture capital funded, you know, Silicon Valley company.
Yeah.
But yeah, and this is what I say to ultimately to your question, which is human nature doesn't change. The fundamentals of what I taught and did in 2006 to 2010 to 2015, all those still apply right now. The context changes, and the primary context of our lives is technology.
Mhm.
So obviously, AI is a big new thing. But the biggest change is like when I said we launched our first SaaS product to help people like me, digital publishers and entrepreneurs. Since that time, the independent SaaS world exploded, and you
Yeah.
have a tool where one person, just you, can do anything. Combine that with AI and you can amplify yourself. So you would never build a 65-person company, probably,
Yeah, there's
because
no
you
need
don't
anymore.
need to. Yeah.
Yeah,
And my message to people is, if you're this age and you're still working a corporate job, this is not a good time. We're looking at a flat stock market for the next decade where you need to catch up on retirement savings. Ageism is a very real thing. They think a young person is better than you and they can pay them less. And then number three is they may try to replace you with AI. But if you own your own tiny little company, AI works for you and it's all
exactly.
upside.
Exactly.
So everyone's freaked out about AI, but I'm trying to flip the script and say, but what if you own the company?
Right, exactly, exactly. There's no reason why we can't use AI. I mean, the tools are so accessible and easy to use. I mean, it's not like it's going to take a lot of education to get up to speed on how you can use AI to,
It's easier
multiply
than you
yourself.
think, which it
Exactly.
took me a while to discover, but like you see these people on LinkedIn sharing prompts and whatnot. The the day I realized that I could just ask Claude to write me the perfect prompt and it did, and then I ran the prompt, right? That's where all these people are getting the prompts, right? We think, oh, these are AI experts. Dude, no, AI is the expert. You
Exactly.
just have to know, you just have to talk to it and play with it. And it's remarkable. And I got to say, I resisted for a while because everyone was talking about using it for writing. Well, I like to write. I think I've written more long form content in the last 3 years than any other, period of equal time. And yet that's my asset now that I can take to AI. And I'm like, well, slice this up into social posts, find the hooks in here. That's what I need help with, dividing it up and spotting the compelling little nuggets, or getting it to analyze it and say, what's another angle that you can come to, take this from. Because
Right.
one thing that I've known, since Copyblogger is you say the same things over and over and over, but you got to say them in different, new, and interesting ways.
Exactly. And AI is great at doing that.
Yeah.
It's good at doing
So
that.
like give me an analogy for this. It's great.
Yeah,
It's not artificial intelligence, it's collective intelligence. It was trained
exactly.
on us, right?
Exactly. Well,
And
well,
now,
when you're talking to AI, you're talking to humanity. You're talking to the rest of humanity
right.
that was already in there.
Yes.
So it's not really a computer. And that's the thing I love about AI is that it feeds you too. So you can
Yeah.
when you have a conversation with it, it sparks ideas in your head, things that you may not even thought about, but it makes some connections for you, and it brings those to the forefront that you may not have thought of. So you're actually working with it. It's not doing all your work for you.
Yeah, the worst thing you can do is outsource your thinking to AI. And writing
Exactly.
is a way of figuring out what you think. Or it doesn't have to be writing, thinking through an argument for a script or a YouTube video or a podcast. That's what I mean. Working through what's your point of view? What's your thought on this issue that only
Right.
you can have? But then once you have that, and you know what you think, then you go to AI and I'm like, this is what I think. What am I missing? What's the emotional center of this? All of this stuff that a really smart, fast assistant could do for you. It's,
Right.
it's quite amazing.
Amazing. So if you were to start today, would you do the same thing that you're doing just on a different platform? Or like let's just say think of somebody out there who's working a corporate job right now and is thinking about doing this. What would your advice be to them?
Well, I feel like I am, to some degree starting now. Now that's not fair because I have people who know me and I have a track record and I've
Yeah,
got
you've built an audience. That's another question I was going to ask as well. I mean,
exactly. But in many ways, further repositioned itself at the beginning of this year when it moved to Substack. So I'm doing exactly what to some degree. Again, I recommend a hybrid strategy. Have a site and your Substack. So I'm living my recommendation right now, and I've always tried to do that. Demonstrate, don't claim. Right.
mm,
So I practice what I preach, and this is what I'm doing right now. I just take people behind the scenes. again, on those fundamentals that never change, because that's generally what people are missing. They think it's tactical. Like if you do this on Substack, then it does this. Yes, but what you're really doing is persuading and emotionally impacting human beings. Doesn't
Right.
matter, the ecosystem matters. That's the context, but you're still dealing with people. And Aristotle had that stuff figured out, you
Right.
know.
So would you say that the things that are most healing are the meta stuff? I mean, this is what happened when I talked to a bunch of others people as well. It's like they talk about their story. They talk about what they're doing for themselves, and they're talking about that in their content. They're not taking a specific topic and saying, I'm going to work on this topic. They're saying, this is my story and I'm expanding upon my story. So it's almost like a meta conversation about themselves, and that is what they're pitching.
That is a very astute observation. I hadn't thought about it quite like that, but it's true. Sometime in between, when I sold the company and now, someone made their observation that it used to be how to, and that Copyblogger was built on how to content.
Right.
True education for free to get you to buy the software that you can now use what you know, right? It was a smart way to sell software. Way
Right.
better than if I'd put that same knowledge in a book and tried to sell it for $20. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Hmm.
But someone said it's gone from how to here's how to here's what I did.
Right.
And I think that's what you just nailed on. And it's important for two reasons. Number one, it's always been the fact that we connect with other human beings more than we connect with their credentials. That's why I say demonstrate instead of claim. No one cares where you went to school, especially now. Like institutional trust is low, but we'll still trust the right human being. And that
Right.
human being will usually share our core values and some aspects of identity. And you have to put it out there for them to realize, hey, this is my person, right?
Hmm.
So that's something that never changes. But in a time of AI where information can be spit out at the push of a button, people don't want information. They want your journey and how they can also go on their own journey with you effectively in the position of being the mentor, right?
Right.
You're guiding them by demonstration, and they're able to follow along and do the same thing, hopefully. So yeah, that's
So
a great observation. Yeah.
no, thanks. And then I want to ask you the eternal artist's question, which is, do you do what you love or do you do what the crowd wants?
Have you ever seen that Venn diagram? It's often improperly attributed to the Japanese concept of ikigai or aikigi, which is
Yes.
reason to live,
The
right?
four overlapping circles. Yeah.
Yeah, and that is a Western BS thing. The Japanese concept
So
has
much
nothing
so.
to do with Venn diagrams, okay? But the Venn diagrams are actually somewhat instructive. And I like to call it the Venn of purpose instead of the Zen of purpose. But purpose is not about following your passion necessarily. It's the overlapping context of, what I like to do and what people will pay me for and what people need. And right, that's
Right.
the answer. And I see all the time people saying, well, I'd really like to make a lot of money with an audience, but I want to do whatever I want to do. And I'm like, well, you're either going to get very lucky or you're going to fail. I
Right.
mean, and there are people who do get lucky, and that keeps
Yeah.
all of the hope alive. But I'm just
Right.
like, do the exercise, be useful. I love this. Steve Jobs, right? So he gave that Stanford commencement speech that gets summarized as follow your passion, but that's not what he said. He said, find
Hmm.
what you love, not do what you love, find what you love, right?
Right.
He's meaning the only way you got to do things to find what it is in the first place. And then at the end of his life, in his biography with Walter Isaacson, he said, no one gives a damn about you and your passion. Your job is to go out there and make a dent in the universe. And that means be
Yes.
useful to other people. And I was just like, thank you for that clarification, because people will do anything to do whatever they want and then complain that they don't get what they want in the form of compensation, right? But
Exactly.
I love what
Exactly.
I do, and I help people, and they pay me money, so that to me, I
That
love
part's
that.
really good. I like that last part.
Yeah, I mean, you got to make a living, So I got to
Did you
fund
have
my
to do a lot of
travels, guys.
did you have to do a lot of pivoting to get to sort of product market fit and what you were your initial business?
Not as much because the really the thing I pioneered more than what content marketing, yes, but it was really the concept of audience first, where you don't start with a product, you attract an audience with a problem, you explore the problem and the solutions to the problem, and then you pay attention very carefully, and the audience will effectively tell you, not I want to buy this, but this is my pain. And then you go, okay, they will pay money to solve that pain. And then you create something specifically for that audience. So, not product market fit, audience product fit, but you start with the audience, not the product. When
Right.
you start with a product, 90% of businesses fail. With my method, I've never failed since 2006. Every single product, not just business, has succeeded. Some more than others, but never a miss because the audience, you got to listen to them. And that's a skill, but it's a lot easier than just guessing, investing your life savings and building something and then having no one who wants to buy it. And it happens too often.
So that was my follow-up question is like when you built your audience, it was a different time. So how would you build an audience today? And not just tactically through Substack. Like what would you do to build an audience? So I'm starting day one, brand new business. I'm going to do use the same model. I'm going to build an audience first, then I'm going to build a product behind it. How do I build that audience first?
Fundamentally, it's exactly the same. It's just, but you can't ignore the tactical changes, the technology changes. Again, back then, search engine rankings were easy for a blogger who could write.
Right.
Okay. Social media was easy. At the beginning of Twitter, I would post about grammar and it would go viral.
Oh
I
yeah.
mean,
I remember that. I was on Twitter in 2008. It was just like that.
yeah, and those days are gone. So
Yeah.
fundamentally, it's the same. People still want content, but they don't want, I don't like the word content, but it's the one we use.
Hmm.
But they don't mean information necessarily. They think they want information, but what they really want to do is resonate with a human being who's going to lead them to the solution to their problem.
Right.
It is the human factor. I am not afraid of AI as long as, well, if you want to outsource your thinking and your humanity to AI, fine. You're not going to succeed because you're creating AI slop content and the internet is filled with it already. But the
Yeah.
people who succeed will connect with human beings in a way that they have for 2,000, 3,000 years. And you go from there. So fundamentally, you put out content in the world. What's changed is how do I get people to see it? Because the old
Right.
way of posting on social media or just publishing to a WordPress blog
Right.
used to do the trick, and now it doesn't. But there are still things to do about it. Which brings me back to Substack, which because it's an ecosystem built around email, your objective is to build an audience around email. And Substack effectively says, this is what we do here. They are indoctrinating people to subscribe to publishers within the ecosystem. So if you're in
Right.
that ecosystem and you resonate with the right people, which means not trying to appeal to everyone, you want to appeal very strongly to a certain type of person. Those people can find you, they'll sign up, and eventually they'll do business with you. It's the same premise, different execution, but it's still got that what I call charismatic content at its heart. It's not charming content. It's charismatic means you are expressing a unifying vision and people are like, I want to be a part of that.
Right. So you would say by starting a Substack and then just sort of being yourself on there, almost like a personal blog, but telling your story, but at the same time imparting information.
Yeah, it's interesting because essentially you're right, being yourself. But I always like to tell people, well, you're actually being your best self
Mm.
for them, which means you need to think of them first. And that's why I love the concept of the mentor or the guide, the hero's journey metaphor. They're the hero of their own story. But if you can act as a guide, they will pay you money
Right.
to take them on the journey. And that's what you're really trying to do. And you just do that through content. en masse instead of one by one or on a one-on-one basis with a person that you might do in work or something like that.
Very nice. It's cool. So if you have any sort of final words, like advice for somebody who wants to get into the life, and what would you say to them?
Yeah, I my thing is positive. You know, the reason why I want to leave and travel is positive. The reason why I start businesses is positive. But at the same time, with the state of things for people our age, you know, having a job is about the least secure position you could be in, especially
Yeah.
in the United States right now. There's going to be layoffs. You know, there's going to be AI human replacement. See if you can start something on the side, play around with AI, you know, figure out who you want to serve, where does your purpose take you, and just work on it a little bit every day. I never tell people you should quit your job and do this. No, but be prepared in case it's not up to you to quit your job. Now, if you
Yeah.
get to a point where your side hustle means you can quit, badass. But if you get laid off, then just blow it up and make it the main thing because you don't want to start from the moment you get that notice because you're going to be stressed, your back's against the wall, and you're not going to perform as well as you will right now. So all I encourage people to do is start. You know,
Hmm.
just start. Have a plan, little bit each day. Another Japanese concept, Kaizen,
Yeah.
small incremental steps each and every day. And next one day you wake up and whether you have to or because you can, you now have something that perhaps can support you and send you off on your own adventure like the two of us.
Fantastic. Well, this has been great. Thank you so much. So if somebody wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way?
Well, Further is located. The main site is further.net. If you sign up there, you'll be on the email list and you'll get the newsletter and all the good content. Let's see. On Substack Notes, I don't know if people are familiar with that, but it's its own little social network built into Substack. And I'm at that Brian Clark, which is also my handle on LinkedIn at
Hmm.
that Brian Clark. So those are the two places that you can find me. Plus, obviously, further.net is where I'd love to see you sign up and take a look at what we're talking about over there. We've got exciting stuff going, and we're forming a community of people who are all about the same age, all have the same objectives, which is what I was after. So cool.
Fantastic. Well, I'll put all the links in the show notes so people can go directly there. And I'm gonna go sign up right now. If I'm not already signed up, I may already be signed up. But
You may be.
you're doing some great stuff there. It's fantastic. Very impressive.
Well,
I
thank you
love
so
it.
much for having me on the show, and I wish you so much success with this project. I don't think you're going to need it, but you're gonna do great.
Well, thank you so much. All right. Well, have a great night. Talk to you
Thank
later.
you.
Bye bye.
Oh, I'm living that nomad life, city to city, feeling alive. From mountain tops to ocean drives unchanged.